Tomorrow we'll be going over the top, finally up against the Hun. So far it's felt too much like a holiday.
You seen the machine guns they got? The artillery? The planes? Damn it, odds of us getting through this campaign gotta be about 25 to 1 against.
Them devils ain't so tough. Us boys will knock out their fortifications easy.
Break this Hindenburg line and finish this war. French been fighting for 4 years. They say just 4 minutes up against these fortified German lines and we look just like them. Yeah, like an army of living dead.
Salutations, senior staff officers. Thanks for joining me. As usual, it's Automatic for Automatic Games, bringing you yet another episode of my Battlefield 1 series. This specific installment entitled Ballroom Blitz, a speculative scenario that kind of represents the American entry into World War I.
General Pershing has ordered an attack along the Meuse River. First, we must secure Shrapnel Corner, this fortified trench line here. Then we will move into their rear, take and hold this chateau. Following this assault, we will continue our push towards this railway hub and capture it quickly.
Now, at the risk of sounding too preachy, I want to start off by sharing with you 3 of the most endearing words in the English language, in my humble opinion. And those 3 words are, I don't know. It seems that there was a time in my own life where I'd drastically hesitate to say, I don't know. And once you decide to abandon that pretentious mentality, you kind of see it in other people all too often, and almost increasingly as I get older I see it. People just have a general reluctance to say I don't know. They want to be an authority on everything. The reason I bring this up is because, you know, I just did the Amiens video, and while I was doing that, I decided to hit up a Great War forum that I'm a member of, and I posed the question, you know, in Battlefield 1 there is on display street fighting in Amiens, but in all the reading I've done and all the research I've done, I've never come across an instance of that. Can anybody put any truth to that scenario? And within 45 minutes an answer came back, and the guy said every single level in Battlefield 1 is based on real-world situations that took place in World War I. And I was kind of dumbfounded with his reply, but I let it go for about 24 hours and continued to look into Amiens specifically. Finally, when I realized, you know, there really wasn't street fighting in Amiens. The 1914 German occupation was very brief and unopposed. And the Battle of Amiens, which was late 1918, it was actually launched out of Amiens. Amiens was a springboard, and there was no fighting there, but that's where the Allied armies set forth from. And I explained this to him in a rather friendly tone, and he came back with all the slurs he could muster. He was still unable to cite his claim that Battlefield 1, every level is based on reality. But, you know, it's almost like this knee-jerk response. It wasn't appreciated by me, to say the least. And it's just indicative of that idea that people are reluctant to confess that they don't know, when I don't know would be the appropriate answer, if any answer is merited at all. Another example of this, in those same forums, and this was a discussion that I wasn't necessarily involved in until I read, they were talking about taking prisoners, and somebody chimed in saying, as far as I understand, the United States Army never took prisoners during World War I, and that was insanity. The topic of discussion was really whether or not you took snipers prisoner, which actually was rare. Usually we did not take snipers prisoner. We usually killed them on the spot. But this idea that we took nobody prisoner, you know, I scoffed at, and I told him we took tens of thousands of prisoners, to be honest. And in fact, in July of 1918, during the Champagne Defensive, a regiment in the Rainbow Division, and I can't recall which regiment, so I'll not say that, but their prisoners all wound up dead, and it led to numerous inquiries and investigations, and a big deal was made out of it, only because taking prisoners was rather normal. And in fact, late in the war, the Germans surrendered in droves, and they would not have done that had they thought they would have just been executed for turning themselves in. I'm going to end my preachy rant there, but I wanted to touch on that. My 3 most endearing words in the English language are, I don't know. And you know, when it comes to making these videos, I don't want to sound like a know-it-all or anything. It's just, I do read a lot about World War I, and mainly first-hand accounts. And when it comes to that, or the Plains Indian War, or the Civil War, and I know I've said this before, I mean, I'm happy to share what I know. But I'm also happy to accept the idea that I may be wrong about some things. And if I'm corrected, I'll embrace that. After all, that's the only way to learn. That's just what I believe at any rate. Now, I wouldn't argue that ignorance is bliss, but I would say that it's nothing to be ashamed of. Anyway, let's pivot from bliss to blitz. After all, the name of this map is Ballroom Blitz, and the featured chateau, they call it Chateau La Croix, but what it is in reality is it's a stunning recreation of the Chateau de Chantilly, which is located just northeast of Paris, so it's not exactly in the immediate vicinity of the Meuse-Argonne offensive. However, it does make for an interesting play area. The Chateau de Chantilly, it was occupied by German forces very briefly in 1914, though there was no major combat in that area. It served many roles throughout the Great War. Most notably, in my opinion, it was the headquarters of General Joseph Joffre, who was the supreme commander of, or well, how would I put that? He was the commander of all French forces early in the war. And in fact, it was from that chateau that they did most of the planning for the Battle of the Somme. That would put him there about late 1915, early 1916. But yeah, it's a stunning example of architecture. What I wish they had done with this level, though, is made it the Battle of Saint Mihiel, because then they could have used the Chateau Benoit or Chateau Theocourt. I mean, they're not as pretty, but it would have more realism to it. There's a sniper up on that wall. Private Ford wants to take a shot. Bullseye. But yeah, had they used the Battle of Saint Mihiel, I mean, I would have preferred that, but I'm fine with the way they did it. But that was a notable battle for many reasons. It was the largest air battle of the entire war. But also it was the first time that we saw an independent United States command calling the shots. And this is not to say that our troops were green prior to this point. Some of them were, but the vast majority had taken part in the Champagne Defensive, among other engagements. And at the helm of this command, you had John Pershing. Blackjack Pershing, they called him. His intent was to liberate the salient. And if you looked at a map, the salient kind of stuck out. It jetted out from the German lines, and it resembled a nose. That's how it was described by a German commander, anyhow. And its strategic value lie in the fact that a railroad cut right through it. And that railroad came up out of Paris northeast, and then went through the salient. And when Ludendorff pulled back the vast majority of his forces to the Siegfried Line, the commander in this sector held. For as long as he held this area, he deprived the French of using those rails to move supplies or troops to the front. And that the commander of the salient, the German commander, that was Max von Gallwitz. And in fact, he had started withdrawing his troops on the eve of Pershings' attack. The attack was to take place on the 12th, and on the night of the 11th, the Germans started to pull out. This was piecemeal, and not all of them. Had he known that the attack was coming, he would have pulled out a lot sooner. But he was pulling out because he anticipated an attack. Actually, I have a quote by him, if you'll bear with my poor German dialect again. And I quote,
Then from foreign sources came the news that the American attack had been postponed, that the army was not yet ready for a big offensive movement. We were surprised, therefore, when on September 12th a concentrated attack was launched against the triangle. It was soon demonstrated that this was not a partial attack, but the execution of a great concentrated drive. The order to retire, which I gave on my own responsibility but too late, could not prevent the loss of many troops and much material which had to be left behind.
End quote. So yeah, though he anticipated an attack, he had received news that the attack had been delayed. So it just wasn't enough, and he had left enough troops in the area to still have a hot contest. But ultimately, the Americans steamrolled over the Germans. And that's just me using my own phraseology to describe it. But what you had with Saint Mihiel was you had an attack which was combined arms. That is to say, infantry, artillery, tanks, air. In fact, the Air Force, well, it wasn't the U.S. Air Force at the time, obviously, but 1,400 and some planes, just shy of 1,500 planes were involved, which made it unprecedented. And as far as, I mean, you had some real personalities involved, too. As far as the tanks, the Renault tanks, their commander was none other than General Patton. Of course, at the time, the man was not a general. He would have been a colonel, lieutenant colonel at the time. But yeah, he used his Renault tanks, in some cases, much like reminiscent of cavalry maneuvers, and to great success, I might add. He encountered situations where he didn't have time to wait for infantry support. And that was the great thing about Pershings' orders. His orders were 8 pages long. The French orders, by comparison, were 150 pages longer than that. And yet, in these 8 pages, he laid out a very specific plan, at the same time giving his subordinate commanders wiggle room to make decisions on the fly. Such was the case with Patton, who decided to use his tanks unsupported on multiple occasions to take out German machine gun nests. And certainly he gained great acclaim for doing so. Now, on the infantry front, you had participants such as Wild Bill Donovan, who would go on to become the first director of the OSS. You had Douglas MacArthur, who would rise to great fame in World War II and, of course, the Korean War. On a lower pay grade scale, you had my direct ancestor, Captain William Bellhorn, commanding officer of L Company 166. On the Army Air Corps front, you had another Ohio boy, Eddie Rickenbacker, who, in fact, I have a quote by him that kind of speaks to the successes he saw on the ground. And I quote,
"The Saint Mihiel drive was on. Leaping out of bed, I put my head outside the tent. We had received orders to be over the lines at daybreak in large formations. It was an exciting moment in my life as I realized that the great American attack upon which so many hopes had been fastened was actually on. At 60 feet above ground straight east of Saint Mihiel, we crossed the Meuse River and turned down its valley toward Verdun. Many fires were burning under us as we flew, most of them well on the German side of the river. Villages, haystacks, ammunition dumps, and supplies were being set ablaze by the retreating Huns. One American army was pushing towards it from a point just south of Verdun, while the other attack was being made from the opposite side of the salient. Like irresistible pincers, the two forces were drawing nearer and nearer to this objective point. We found the Germans in full cry to the rear. That same night, we were advised that the victorious Americans had taken Thiaucourt, that scene of so many of our operations back of the lines. And we were also informed that at last Montsec had fallen. Its high crest dominated the entire landscape. The capture of Montsec was a remarkably fine bit of strategy. It was neatly outflanked and pinched out with a very small loss indeed. Our infantry and tank corps accomplished this feat within 20 hours.
End quote. And indeed, that attack had launched on the morning of the 12th. By the end of the 13th, the major actions had pretty much ceased. There remained just some German artillery shots, and they said that it wasn't massive bombardments. It would be, one account I read from Ohio and the Rainbow was they'd frustrate your sleeping patterns by one gun firing, and then it would fire a little long of where it fired. Then it would fire to the right of where it fired. Then it would fire to the left of where it fired. Then it would fire a little short, making a cross formation, as it were. But otherwise, major action had ceased rather quickly. And you can only imagine what this did for U.S. morale. Now, the reason this level reminds me of Saint Mihiel is this railroad juncture, which is the key to it. Which, as discussed earlier, was the key to that battle. Well, that's about all the time we have. Oh, I might add one more thing. With those casualties, what did I say? That the Germans lost 21,000, 22,000? 15,000 of which were prisoners. Prisoners that some guy on some forum said we would just shoot outright. But apparently we didn't. Did we? Anyhow, this is Automatic for Automatic Games. Remember, the 3 most endearing words in my opinion are I don't know. If you like this, like this. Thanks for watching, folks. I'll talk to you again soon, friends.